Is a Carli suspension kit worth it for your truck? It's not only cosmetics. We're going to go through the details of the difference between this stock truck, which is a F350 diesel engine with the off-road package, and compare it to Ty's truck over here, which has the Carli Pintop package with every Carli option you can get for that suspension. So let's start on the rear. So major difference between Ty's truck and this factory truck is you have a very light bed on the back of it and a completely different spring pack. So we have the factory springs on a F350, has one spring at the bottom, 3 in the main pack, and 1 overload, and 1 just standard size shock. So immediately when we took off on our test track, making corners, going fast, you'll notice a lot of axle hopping. So those big bumps are challenging for this factory suspension to keep up. Now, if you're under the 5 mph range, it does great, but once you hit 15, 20, 30, even 45 miles an hour, it's absolutely uncontrollable. Inside the cab while driving, I noticed about a 80% reduction in vibration from the small bumps driving Ty's truck with the Carli system than I did on the factory pickup. So one thing I noticed when we start hitting some oscillating bumps is if you look in the mirror, you can see the front and the rear of the cab, everything is shaking. There's a lot of axle hop, the tires are coming off the ground. We couldn't corner as fast, we're losing some traction. We couldn't get out of the corners as fast because the front axle is not as stable. So as that front axle is bouncing around, every time you lose traction, whether it's the front or rear tire, you lose speed and stability. Up here on the front, we have our factory springs. So with the off-road package, we're getting a small lift and a 33-inch tire with a Goodyear Wrangler. So we have a great tire for traction. You'll notice some rooster tails in the video. Great traction. We could definitely pick up speed, but it was those bumps where it became challenging. With the off-road package, you do have the shorter front valence, which we specifically brought this truck because we knew the large valence they put on the other trucks would have bottomed out going through these whoops. So at 13 miles an hour, which was my max speed through the whoops, you can see a couple of times the front wheels actually lifted off the ground. We had full suspension compression over nearly every whoop where you could make contact with that bump stock. Now on Ty's truck with a Carli suspension, at 13 miles an hour, there's absolutely 0 tires leaving the ground, which means you maintained 100% traction the entire time. We never once bottomed out. So both on the front and the rear, we have progressive spring rate. So on the rear, we have the Deaver spring. This spring pack is made up of 8 springs in the primary pack. It does not have an overload. We run a heavy duty airbag to accommodate for trailering. So this spring pack gives you a progressive rate, which means those smaller bumps, it's gonna have a lighter spring rate. As that spring comes up, it will get firmer and further and firmer as it gets towards the top of the suspension travel, ultimately making connection with the bump stop. On the front and rear, we have the Carli Pintop shock, which is produced by King. This one is specifically valved for the weight of this truck. So we have an additional 2,000 pounds of payload in both the spring rate and the shock on the rear. When you come to the front of the truck, we have a 3.5-inch lift kit on the front versus from the factory, you're looking at about a 1-inch. So we have quite a bit more suspension travel. We have limiting straps, but we have further down. So when we went over the whoops, we never lost traction with the ground. The front suspension was allowed to drop further than the factory suspension, and it was allowed to rise up further. We have about 4 more inches of suspension travel with this Carli kit than we did on the factory truck. Now, in addition to the factory truck, we have the factory track bar and the factory drag link. On Ty's truck, we do have the factory drag link, but we do have a Carli Heim joint track bar, which adds a lot of stability, prevents that axle from rocking side to side because there are no rubber bushings in that track bar. So as you hit bumps and that axle is moving up and down, that track bar has to let the axle go a little bit side to side because of the angle of that track bar moving up and down. When you have rubber joints in there and you're looking at really rough terrain off-road, you're gonna have some play and you're gonna feel it in the steering input. Now this thing was great to hard brake into a corner, put that load in the front tires, make your steering inputs, throttle out of the turn. I couldn't get that out of the factory suspension. We also have much larger shocks up front, so as we hit those bumps, it keeps those front tires a lot more stable. And we have the Carli Diff Guard steering damper, which comes with a lower damper that connects to the front tie rod and an upper damper that connects to the drag link. On the factory truck, all we have is factory components. That includes 1 damper that is attached from the frame rail over to the drag link. So as you hit these large bumps off-road, you don't have near the steering dampening capability, especially when you're coming through a corner. That steering wheel is going to be giving you a lot more feedback. So I'm always trying to get free stuff, and Carli told me if I could break their suspension components, they'd send me some free stuff. So we're out here at the Whiteface Ford test track, brought to us by Matt V-Hill. The first track setup wasn't rough enough, so he came back and gave us some bigger whoops, some bigger jumps. So we made the whoops about 40% bigger, and we added more of them. Because what we found the first time is we weren't stressing the Carli suspension enough. We're gonna talk about how the truck performed. We've got a Carli Pintop kit with everything you can get, and these are specifically tuned for a flatbed. So these shocks on the rear and the Deaver springs are set for a consistent payload of 2,000 pounds more than stock. So that accommodates the roughly 1,000 pounds we add by putting the pronghorn bed and then all the tools that Ty has inside. So in the cab, the bumps are so bad, Ty's wallet came open and dollar bills went flying everywhere. His sunglasses went flying, the radar detector went flying. We pushed it a little bit harder than we did last time, and let's see what we broke and how everything managed inside. So everybody always asks how the tools do. Well, this was a lot rougher than I think your normal farm and ranch day. We still have most of the stuff on the rack. We lost our magnetic glove holder here. I guess it helps if you put that on right side up. You have to do some reorganization in there. Okay, I can't even get that back in there right now. Toss these back in. We got lots of stuff everywhere. We even knocked the seal off the box, so that was a pretty hard run. We do have our Apex cooler back here. The Apex cooler actually stayed on. I lost Ty's antenna once, remounted back up there. Everything in the toolbox is like a yard sale. It's all over the place. But let's talk about the actual suspension. So on the rear, everything has held up perfect. We didn't have the shocks bottom out. The springs felt really nice. We had a little bit of a hop after landing, but when you jump an 11,000 pound Super Duty, 30 feet long, I guess it's okay if it bounces a little bit when it lands. Now up front, we ran 5 laps, and every time it went faster and faster. I do have some issues up front, but it is not with the Carli component. It's actually pushed out both upper ball joints. So essentially they're loose, and right now it's cambering in because the top of that ball joint, the shim, which we have adjustable caster shims in it, we have pushed those all the way out. So I definitely need new ball joints, top and bottom. When we look underneath, our dampeners work great. The Carli track bar looks perfect. Our drag link is still in a good position. Upper damper looks good. The Carli sway bar looks great. The axles still look nice and straight, but the upper ball joint, so I think we compressed the lower ball joint up so hard in those landings that it actually, even though they were torqued to spec, pushed those shims up and they rotated and the thing is cambered in. But it looks like just upper ball joints is all we're gonna have to do. And we drove this thing hard, and I guarantee any of you guys will drive it. My body hurts. That thing was so rough riding inside. I wouldn't recommend it. And it's not because of the suspension, but we drove this thing in a manner that you should probably never drive a truck. I was surprised my airbags honestly didn't go off. We do have some traction control lights. The motion of the cab was so hard on some of these landings that we ended up setting the traction control ABS light, so we'll have to go back and reset that. Yeah, on the first test lap, we weren't sure exactly what speed to run. I came through these whoops running about 45, which I found out was a little harsh. These are dirt bike style whoops. They're closer together than the wheelbase of this truck, and so this thing was just teeter-tottering from one whoop to the next. We were getting at least almost a tire size worth of height off each one of them, bouncing up and down. At that point, I thought my airbags were gonna go off. It was pretty rough. But the Carli suspension, I'm impressed. Everything Carli-wise is perfect. The truck rode phenomenally smooth given the course that we were on. The cornering was impressive. So the sway bar around these corners, if you ever driven any type of trophy truck or done some track laps with a Mustang or some kind of sports car, you know how that input is when you press the brake, you get the nose down and you can really dig into a corner and throttle out of it while you open up that steering. The truck felt exactly like running hot laps on the racetrack, coming in and out of those corners. We have some corners that were banked out of the turn, some that were banked into the turn, so we got to test both scenarios and see how it tracked. The BFG HD terrains did great. So these things really dug in. I created a lot of powder back there, so we water packed this thing this morning to give us a little bit more traction, get the soil nice and compressed. But these lugs are so big, the way they just grab and go, I really dug some deep ruts on this backside corner over here. So every lap got a little bit slower getting to that area, but overall just super impressed with how well you can make basically a street legal truck drive. If you want to do this kind of stuff, all we need to do is put some upgraded ball joints there. I think we'll have a Baja ready truck. So the truck is still driving fairly well. I did notice my steering is a little bit off, about 15 degrees off, so I knew something was going on. Up front, you can notice both tires are a little bit cambered in. Is all this Carli money worth it? In my opinion, absolutely it is worth the money.